Today I want to tell you my story. I want to take you back in my childhood and give you a glimpse into the dysfunction, the chaos, and the trauma, and what occurred to lead me into putting others first, putting myself last, getting into unhealthy relational dynamics, and how we can look at those aspects in our childhood upbringing and impressions in order to understand why we are in dysfunctional patterns ourselves and in relation to others. And so, open your heart, listen with big ears, and see where this lands in your life. So I am one of 4 children that my parents had. And when I was almost 5 years old, my sister drowned. She was my little sister. She was 2. And that was the beginning marks of a very tough upbringing for me as a child. 1 year later, after my sister passed away, my mom was attacked in our home. We had an intruder enter early of the morning hours, watched my dad leave for work, entered our home, and sexually assaulted and attacked my own mother. What I remember of these 2 events as a child so young, the first one, I only remember very little, the day of the accident, some bits and pieces of that trauma, crying in my parents' bed, afraid to go to the hospital, afraid of what was happening, hiding in the sheets, while the neighbor told me I needed to go, that it was time to go to the hospital. I don't remember a day after that event. I don't remember the funeral. I was still pretty young. I know that we were emotionally distraught, but that part's been pretty blacked out for me. The event a year later with my mom, the only recollection I have was walking out of my room, being woken up to all the commotion, and seeing a stranger running down the stairs of my childhood home, being chased out by, I believe, my brother, and getting on his motorcycle and leaving. My parents went through hell. And as a result of that, when I think back on who I was, how I felt after going through that trauma, was alone. I felt alone. My poor parents were struggling with grief, chaos, trauma that most people can't imagine experiencing. One of those, let alone both. And those were major markers. Other things occurred as well. So subsequent from those 2 markers, I have a few years in there where I felt pretty alone, pretty isolated, and don't remember a whole lot. My parents were really surviving. And when you are surviving, you're really not showing up emotionally the way you need to reflect to a child what they need to feel secure, safe, and in their body. So as a result of me feeling alone, I knew that I didn't have emotionally secure environment, but I definitely didn't have parents who were emotionally available for me if they were going through their own grief and sadness. And prior to this, of course, the generational dysfunction coming from, the boomers, but before that, their parents, on how we raise children. And do we speak about our feelings? Do we talk about how important it is that what we do affects other people? And communicating our needs, communicating what's happening, and trying to find resolution and repair to that. Those weren't things that occurred in my household. And this isn't to give my parents a hard time. We all know that each of us is doing what we can, hopefully, to change those dynamics in our lives with our children. But it is an awareness of bringing in a lack of emotional intelligence via my parents, and then having trauma happen only creates a layered, effect that makes things much more difficult. So without that self-reflection, without having parents who really could be there emotionally for me, and I don't blame them, going through some of those years, but as a whole, not feeling really seen, not really feeling ever heard, feeling that I had to show up a certain way for one of my parents in order to get attention. And as a result, I find going into my teenage years, partying, doing whatever I can to get out and have fun and be away from my house as much as possible. That occurred. And throughout those early years, I also had quite a bit of bullying occur. Little Summer was pretty vulnerable. And I'm sure you can just imagine the vulnerability when you've, experienced that kind of trauma. And again, not understanding that, having no awareness as a child into and conceptualize what's going on and why you feel, out of sorts and your nervous system being dysregulated as a child, right? So not feeling secure in yourself, little kids can pick up on that. So I never really fit into the crowds. I struggled to ever get along with or fit into any of the girl groups. I even had boys pick on me. I had a couple of occasions going from elementary into junior high, and going into high school, where I had guys physically assault me, kick me down, kick me in the shin, and bully me. And then going into high school, wanting to just go and do whatever I could do to escape. But through that time, I definitely started to notice, male's attraction to me. And that started, in high school. And it felt good to be seen. It felt good to be told, you're beautiful. But not realizing that some of that was highly inappropriate. And I told this story in the last video, that I started noticing that I was attracting predatory type men. People way too much older than me being attracted to me. Far past, into their 30s, 40s. And that's in my teenager years that started to happen. That occurred for my first job. I worked at a hair salon, and the owner convinced me to start doing hair. I was the receptionist there at the time. And that owner was highly abusive. If I made any mistake, he'd take you in the back. He took me in the back. I wasn't the only one. And would yell at me so the whole salon could hear. And instead of understanding my power, understanding how wrong that was, I stayed. I didn't understand that what he was doing was wrong. I internalized it. I accepted it as part of my responsibility, or what I was supposed to do, and to just be better, get better, be perfect for those around me. So one of my first relationships I got into, I didn't like this person at all. I found myself being convinced by him, being charmed by him, to open up to him, against my better judgment. My body said no, my mind said no. This person was not in the heart at all. And oddly enough, through all of the trauma that I went through, I have stayed in my heart the entire time. You often hear this, and it's very true. Trauma commonly creates empaths. And again, that's just a term right? We slap on people who feel a lot, are highly sensitive. Because when you go through a lot, your capacity grows. And mine absolutely did. And people can sense that on you. So I truly believe that when we get into these dynamics where you're highly sensitive, highly vulnerable, very emotionally available for people, to your detriment, you will attract, like I did, the very first relationship I had, people who want to feel because they don't want to feel. So they use you and your feelings and your emotions and feel good in your energy until you suddenly, or not so suddenly, start realizing you're being drained, right? You're being taken advantage of if you don't go along with their ideas and know that your needs and wants are never going to come first in those types of relationships. So I ended up getting pregnant at 22 years old with my boyfriend at the time. Had my girls, found out I was having twins, not married, completely shocked, having to feel like I was still not even in the beginning stages of figuring out where my life was going. And now at 22, almost 23 years old, I was going to be a mom of two. Fast forward, the girls and I, father, did not make it. And that was a blessing that was needing to end. So I moved out with the girls when they were 2, almost 3 years old, as a single mom, trying to raise 2 girls with a narcissistic ex, somebody who was very, very selfish. You know, we were young. He didn't know how to show up as a father, and I understand. It's tough when you're young and you're still trying to find out who you are. And so pretty quickly, not shortly after, I ended up meeting my next long-term relationship. Now, this is a very important part of my story because when I left that first relationship, I had a pretty good job. But after I moved in, after some months, the company had to close. I lost my job. I'm a single mom to 2. I'm dealing with a difficult ex who doesn't show up often and not the way he needs to for his children. And I became pretty depressed. I feel, looking back at that, I didn't, number 1, feel good enough about myself. But number 2, I didn't have the tools, the self-awareness to get out of my own way, to believe in myself, to love myself enough to push even harder through those difficult feelings, those emotions I was feeling. It was a lot to take on at that time. And so shortly after that, I actually met my now relationship that is now I'm shifting out of. And this part is really important because if we're not whole in ourselves, we're obviously going to attract people who are going to sense that, right? We all know like attracts like, right? Who we are, where we are vibrationally, where we are in our life, is going to be a reflection of who we attract and bring into our life. So I was very needy, and not in the respect that I ever said I needed things from other people, but needy in the respect of attention, potentially, definitely financially as well. So I attracted this partner who wanted to come in and save the day. And I allowed it because I didn't know my power, my sense of self. I hadn't gotten on my feet fully yet. And because of that need, because I wasn't whole in myself yet, though I wanted to be, he was pushing me to get married. And this was the start of me giving in and going against my own awarenesses, which led down a 14-year marriage where my needs, my wants, my desires, my says weren't first. And that's not always it's not putting blame only on him. That was because I lowered myself, my needs, and didn't speak up for myself or do those things I needed to do. So I got married for him. I had my first baby, who I love to pieces, but got pregnant for him. And because of that, our lives kind of became a revolving around him in the beginning years. I was small. I did people please. Could I feel dysfunction or could I feel pain as a result of that? Absolutely. So was there some squabbles and things that started coming up? Yes, I would try and speak about my needs, but it didn't have the context of why these things were occurring and what healthy relationships look like. I could feel it wasn't right, but I didn't understand. I didn't have verbiage to put to it on what healthy relationship dynamics do for one another. How do they function? And so the expectations that were put and imposed on each other that came from lack is definitely what attracted us to each other. And through these 14 years, I started to begin to find myself again. And the reason that happened was because I was so sick and tired of feeling the way I was feeling. When I started to try and rise, when I started to find myself, I started to find healing. I started to understand relational dynamics, why they tick, why you attract people who are emotionally unavailable or avoidant. If you're with me and in this story, you can hear my story, but many of you who are really going to resonate with me are the people pleasers, the overgivers, the ones that overfunction, put themselves last on some capacity, always looking for what you can do for other people. What I want to say to you is, you've learned to look and focus on everything outside of you, to overfunction for everyone else, instead of looking directly in the mirror at how you have been avoiding the very thing you need to look at in order to change your life, in order to bring joy, in order to be happy. And that is what you need to do for yourself first. Cognitively, how you think about yourself. Physically, how do you care for your body? Working out, what you put into it, how you speak to it, how you see yourself. How do you care for yourself emotionally when you're going through things? Do you take time out? Do you listen to when you're feeling something, what you need? Maybe you need a time out for a day. Maybe you need to go on a walk for an afternoon. But instead of listening to what you need, you're probably overfunctioning for your children or for your partner or maybe your husband, and keeping super hyper busy so that you don't have to spend the time to look at yourself. And if you're like me, and if you've began, or you likely began, or have gotten to maybe some of the end stages like I'm at now, where you've started to speak up for yourself, maybe where you started to go to the gym, or you started to talk about how you're feeling and the needs or wants or desires you have for yourself or your relationship or your family dynamic. And things have started to become shaken up. And if your partner in any way can't meet you there, I just want to say, I know how painful that is. It's painful when your partner is avoidant or doesn't want to meet you in consciousness, in growing their own, and growing themselves and healing those parts of themselves. Which is things like when you are hurting and you bring something to the table that you need. Do they meet you with kindness, hear you out, hold space for you? Or do they get immediately defensive? do they project back onto you about what you've done to get them there? The thing is that we tend to want to bring so much other stuff into each conversation instead of just focusing on the one thing that is presented in front of us in the moment and working on that one thing. And the thing that we need to understand is we can start working on ourselves, but we have to understand and know and be willing to do so, even if it means that the relationship may change, and be willing to flow with that. Because this life really is about evolving in love. It is about changing generational trauma. You can't do that unless you love yourself first. And it is absolute bullshit to say that loving yourself is selfish in any way. What people always miss about that is loving yourself, like narcissism or narcissistic trait people do. They need other people in order to feel that love. That's not loving yourself first. And this is the distinction that needs to be understood. Loving yourself first is checking in with yourself, not others, first, and saying, what do I need in this moment in order to show up in love? If I need to regulate, do I need a hug? Do I need a certain relational dynamic? What does my body need? Etc., etc. What boundaries do I need to put in place in order to maintain healthy dynamics? Those aren't things people that have narcissistic traits or have avoidant tendencies are asking themselves. And sure, it's a spectrum, but I'm just being general here. They're not asking themselves. They have a pattern that they learned in childhood to take from others in order to get what they want, right? They don't care who they hurt along the way. They'll use you sexually. They'll use you financially. They'll definitely use you emotionally. Because those people who have held the part of themselves that feels their heart so far back in their consciousness, so far back in themselves, because there's so much shame there, there's so much pain there from how they, and we won't go into that today, but of course how they were raised to function, that they had to take that part of themselves, put it in the background. So they're not accessing their heart. They love to access that through you. Because you're available, you give and overgive and function for the both of you emotionally. This will always lead to depletion. It is not sustainable long term. And on some level, there's a mirror to each other in this dynamic, which is how are we both functioning for other people to get our needs met instead of putting ourselves first. And needing to fill ourselves full, our cup full, and then being able to overflow that to another. And sure, there's going to be times that we lean on each other, but we're not talking about the one-offs. We're talking about a general day-to-day. And so if you come from a childhood where your needs weren't met, where you were isolated, alone, not seen, you're likely in a similar dynamic that I just spoke about. Or you've been through many. Or maybe you're on the other side of it. Congratulations if you are. But we have to be very cognizant of not getting into another one again and again and again, right? You hear about people jumping from relationship to relationship or divorce to the next marriage only to find that the same thing is occurring. Because you haven't done the work in yourself to put yourself first, to understand yourself in a way that you know your needs, your wants, your desires, what's important to you. If you don't know who you are, you sure as heck aren't going to attract somebody that knows who they are either. And therefore there's this constant take from one another, overgive, overfunction, take what the other needs, so you don't have to feel. So my call with this, in telling this part of my story, because my story is so much bigger than this, I only wanted to give you a portion of that today. So many aspects where this played out in friendship dynamics or business dynamics in the years after I started waking up to this, so that I could see how people function and how I needed to raise in power, raise in consciousness. So you spot those things like that before you get into those dynamics in the first place. So just wanted to give you a bit about my story, leave that with you today, and just say, if this resonates with you in any way, I hope you're working on yourself today. I hope today you ask yourself what you need first. Because when you do that, you will function in such a healthy way for everyone else around you, not only your kids, but your romantic relationship. And it may mean things will get upset, and again, the dynamic may change, but we have to be willing to go through that chaos and that dysfunction, or that pain and that, that upset, in order to make things change. And why don't any of us want to change? Well, because we're afraid of what that means for us. We're afraid of that new experience. But if you want to evolve and you're sick enough for how you feel, you'll make those changes. In love you guys.